I wish I had realized you guys were in Minnesota earlier because I just thought of it now. I have cousins there. I should have made them come.
Oh,
I should have been like, you have to go. It's a virtual book event.
right. Yep. All right, so I did start recording. And do you think, Hilary, should we get started or do you want to?
Whatever you think. Yeah.
Minute?
We can give, whatever you think.
Yeah, why don't we give it a minute and get started? I see Tatum's on. Tatum, are you on?
I'm here. Hi.
Hi. We're going to just give it another minute to see if others join, and then we'll get started. All right, why don't we get started? It's 3 minutes past. All right. So, welcome everyone. We have, I'm Rima from The Thinking Spot, and today we have the honor of hosting Hilary Kearney. Did I say that right, Hilary?
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. The author of Heart of the Hive that just came out on September 3rd. So I'm excited to talk about that. Hilary is an author, obviously, but she also has a couple other books. It's the one called Little Book of Bee, and there's another one called Queen Spotting, which I don't have at the moment. But in addition, she runs a beekeeping business that offers educational opportunities to hundreds of beekeepers every year. She also maintains a blog, Beekeeping Like a Girl, and writes in various magazines and online sites. And most importantly, or most interestingly, I find she rescues wild bee colonies and then also manages 90 beehives, or maybe more now, you can tell us, in her hometown, San Diego. So very excited to talk to you, Hilary. Welcome to this evening. All right, I am really excited. This is very cool to be talking to you because when I read your book, Hilary, your passion for the bees and this whole the honeybees in particular and their behavior and all of that, the passion comes out. It's so clear that you love the bees and you love what you're doing. So I'm curious, how did you come about that? Was there somebody in your family that set you on this path, or how did you go about get to this point?
Well, actually, it was a book that brought me into the world of beekeeping. So it's kind of fun to now be an author. But yeah, I actually didn't know that people still kept bees because I grew up in Southern California, like just going to the beach and hanging out. And I don't have any agricultural connections in my family. And so I thought, like all the beekeepers were dead, that it was something that you did in like the 1800s and now it wasn't really happening anymore. And so when I met my husband, he had this bucket list on his wall of all the things he wanted to do. And there were crazy things like become a firefighter, ride my bike across the country. And then one of them was just get bees. And it was because he had taken an entomology class at school and his section leader or something was a beekeeper and showed them the hives. And so he just kind of flippantly had a vague interest in doing it. But for whatever reason, when I saw that, I went, what? And so I bought him a book because I found this book that was called Backyard Beekeeping, and it's by Kim Flodham. And it said backyard beekeeping, you could do this in your backyard. So I thought, oh, I'll get this for him. But then I read it, and the beginning part of the book is all about honeybee behavior and the structure of the hive. And I just thought it was so fascinating. I had no idea how smart they were. So it just kind of grabbed me. And then after I graduated college, I moved back to San Diego, and I was just bored, and it was during the recession, so I couldn't get a job. And I was just living with my dad, and I said, can I put bees in the backyard? And he said, yes. So I just started researching it, and he actually built me my first hive out of scrap wood that we just had laying around. And it just kind of snowballed into a business for me. It was very organic. And then I had the idea of writing Queen Spotting, and then I was approached to write the Little Book of Bees. And then me and my editor from Story came up with this idea of doing the honeybee behavior book. She kind of was like, what ideas do you have? And I gave her a whole list, and she liked that one. So
Sure.
Yeah.
Very cool. Very cool. Gives us hope that anybody can start. And
Yeah.
Pretty cool. So as I was reading through the first thing that struck me in this whole thing, and that's almost my favorite part of the book, is how you describe, like, honeybees are individuals, right? There's each bee, but there's this organism, especially in the case of honeybees, that the hive, and it's almost a living organism of its own, and that's sort of how you describe it. So can you speak to that a little bit? Like, how did you come to that sort of realization? Almost feels like that a bee is a thing, and now the hive is its own thing.
Right. I think that's this really interesting concept that's kind of hard to get across because it's so alien to us as
Right.
humans, I think. And not that many animals live that way. I mean, it's like bees, termites,
Ants.
Ants. And I think like naked mole rats or something. there's very, very few, like coral maybe. But yeah, it's so interesting the way that they're able to adapt and survive in that way, and to think about that you have to simultaneously think of them as individuals and also as this collective animal. And so I think it's really important that people understand that, because it's what makes honeybees really unique. Like, even among bees, there's 20,000 species of bees, and only 3 groups live that way. It's bumblebees, honeybees, and stingless bees. So yeah, it's just I think it's one of the most fascinating things about honeybees, because it kind of frames why they're so different right off the bat.
Yeah, and you just kind of describe there's the body, and there's the head, and the stomach of the honeybee, and it's just
It's really hard to equate it to a metaphor, because there's no right metaphor for it.
Yeah.
And so you have to, it's like, I said, they store in the honeycombs, like everyone knows the word honeycomb, and we think of it as just comb and it has honey in it. But a lot of people don't know that it's also used to raise babies. It's used for communication, and it's like the actual structure that they live on. So it's kind of this living architecture. It's really hard to draw like any kind of comparisons, because there's not that much else that is like that.
Right, but you did a great job of it, right? Like,
Thanks.
It was very I could visualize it, how you described it, that I could think of a whole organism with these different parts that we think of in any living organism. It's pretty cool. So going then to the individual bees, and in particular for the honeybees, each one has a different task almost, right? There are different tasks that they do. So can you describe that a little bit? Like, what are the different
Yeah. So there's like 3 different types of honeybees in the hive, and the majority of them are worker bees. But then we also have the queen bee, and we have the males, which we call drones. And within that worker bee group, each one has a different job that she's assigned, or we don't know how they're given the job. Like, it might be genetic, it might be pheromonal, like it could shift. And it's this really flexible job system. So that's what's interesting about it, is that they can change from job to job. depending on the needs of the colony, but they follow a general progression by age. So they tend to start out with inside the hive jobs like cleaning, taking care of the larva, which is the baby bees, taking care, making honey inside the hive and building comb. And then they progress to these kind of outside the hive jobs that are like the undertaker bee who takes out the dead, the guard bees who just wait at the entrance and protect the entrance, kind of like bouncers. And then eventually, like halfway through their lives, they all become the forager bees, which are the ones that are going to flowers that we all see in our gardens and stuff.
Right. And how did you did you observe each of these behaviors in your hives, or is it more from reading and then a combination of the two?
Yeah, I mean, you can observe a lot of the behavior described in the book. If you're a beekeeper and you have a hive, you can kind of recognize it. But it's the kind of thing that you might not recognize if you hadn't read about it first. Mm-hmm. So, it's like you don't really know what they're doing. Then you read about it and you start looking and you go, oh, those are the undertaker bees carrying out the dead. I read about that, or those are the groomer bees. They're cleaning each other, And one of the things I described in the book is the way they dehydrate honey, which is they put a little, sometimes they'll put droplets on the rim of the cell to try and aerate it, to get the moisture to come out of it. And I actually got a photo, it's not in the book because it's not my photos in the book, but I got this macro photo of the droplet on the side of the cell. And I was like, I know what this is, it's so cool. I got a picture of it. So that kind of thing happens all the time. But yeah, I think mostly you have to read about it first to understand what you're seeing. I did a lot of research, like a lot of research to write the book. So some of it is my own experiences as a beekeeper, but a lot of it is from research papers and biology books. And part of the reason that I wanted to write the book is that all this information is out there, but it's not easily accessed by just everyday people. And it's not that enjoyable to read because it's embedded in these dense research papers or huge, expensive biology books. Yeah. So I wanted to kind of put it all in one place and make it easier to understand and more fun and entertaining to read so that people could understand how complicated and interesting honeybees are without having to do as much research as I did, Oh,
that's totally very readable book is. But then they also I think you mentioned that they start out doing one thing, but then they adapt, which is also pretty cool.
Yeah.
And they can change from one to another, if they need to, as environment changes or the stressors change, that they change into other things. So that was
one of the wildest studies that I looked at, and I had read it many years ago and it blew my mind, and I came back to it because I wanted to include it in the book, was about these researchers who wanted to see what would happen if they removed all of the young bees from the hive. So they removed all the young bees from the hive and left only the old foragers, the ones leaving to forage. And what happened was the colony adapted to it by having some of the foragers revert back to the jobs that they did before, the jobs that were needed to be done because they had lost all of the young bees. But the craziest thing is that they tested their cognitive abilities before and after. And they found that, as honeybees age, there's things that happen to them that's the same as us. They lose their hair, their cognitive abilities decline, and their bodies get worn out. And what they found was that when they went back to these jobs of their youth, they regenerated. Wow. Their cognitive abilities came back. So they essentially grew younger again, so obviously that's very exciting research because could it apply to us, but when you talk to older people, a lot of people say, being around young people keeps them young. I used to keep bees in a gentleman's backyard, and he was like the neighborhood favorite. Everyone knew him. He had a pool, nobody else did, and he just opened up his pool all summer long for the neighborhood kids to come over. And he said, I love it because the kids keep me young. And he felt that he was living longer because of it, having that interaction with kids. So I do think it kind of applies in that way to us.
Yeah. Certainly possible. The other thing, one of the many things fascinating about these bees is their intelligence. There's also, you describe a lot of the experiments like the one you just said, but others uh, go to how they can learn and how much, right? Even individual bees, because the thought could be that now it's a hive and everybody is programmed to do certain things, but that doesn't seem to be the case, right? Each individual also seems to be fairly intelligent in its own right.
Yeah, so there's a lot of there's kind of a growing base of research around understanding, the problem solving abilities of individual bees, whether or not they teach each other, how much they know. And so they've actually been tested for, can they solve math problems? And they found that they could do basic arithmetic. They do teach each other on some level. Some of this research is on bumblebees, so it's maybe it doesn't apply to honeybees, but the consensus is that they're similar enough that probably it somewhat does. And so but yeah, there is a lot of everything in the book I made sure was specifically about honeybees, but I think I think there's a lot of really interesting work that could be done there that's really changing our perception of insects, because we think of them as just being little robots operating on just sensory cues, when in fact they seem to be very good at problem solving. And, honeybees have like an incredibly small brain. It's like the size of a sesame seed, but it has 1 million neurons in there. So it's actually one of the densest animal brains in terms of number of neurons per space, amount of space given. So I feel like our perception of animal intelligence is really limited, and egotistical, frankly. And I think that we really need to open our eyes to the possibilities of these animals are intelligent, possibly in different ways than us, that are harder for us to understand, because these research projects are looking at the individual bees. Now, what if we could somehow apply that to the superorganism? Because imagine how much smarter they are than us if they're so smart as individuals, and then they're able to interact and cooperate and work together so closely. It's almost like they're superhuman, their abilities to do things as a group versus just the individuals.
That's an interesting thought, that if they apply or do these experiments on the group as a whole, which you sort of described, right, when they took away the younger bees, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, there are some experiments that are about the group and not just the individual, but there's not as many like that.
Yeah. Okay. The other fun thing in there was the dances that you described. That was new to me. I kind of heard about some of the other things, but the dances and how there's almost a language to it, right? And the different.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's one of the most famous things about honeybees, is that they have what we would call, what's been classified as a symbolic dance language, and no other animal has been credited with that. So the most famous dance that they do is the waggle dance, that tells other bees directions for how to get to flowers. But the way that they do that is all communicated through dance. But while they dance, they're communicating the direction, the distance, and they're telling them, and they're actually drawing an angle in relation to the sun, like on the comb, with their dance movements. So like a literal treasure map,
yeah,
to the flowers. So it is kind of just like mind blowing, and that's the dance we know the most about. But there's all these other dances that we don't even fully understand, and there could be more dances than what I even listed there. So that's the other exciting thing about it, is there's been so much research done, and there's still so much we don't know.
And again, I keep going back to the observation. So are you able to see some of this stuff, or is it kind of inside the hive? Or what kind of are there, the ones you have? Is that like they're open air, or are they closed?
Yeah, so most beekeepers their hive styles are inside, their comb is inside of some kind of structure, because it's what the bees want. They want to be protected inside of some kind of cavity. So I have a lot of the traditional like boxes stacked on top of each other style hive, but I also have some what we call top bar hives, which are horizontal. It's kind of like imitating like a fallen log. Um, and so the comb is lined up like horizontally instead of vertically. But yeah, all the dances happen inside the hive, and you can see them on the comb. You can watch them, especially the waggle dance is very recognizable because it's that distinct like figure eight pattern. And it usually happens on the combs that are very close to the entrance because that's where all the foraging bees are hanging out. So if you're a beekeeper and you go close to the entrance and look at them, a lot of times you get to see them doing that dance at least.
Do you spend a lot of time at the beehives?
Oh yeah, I always take time. I like to take photos and videos and to share on social media and stuff. So I'm often just kind of geeking out with my hive open, like trying to get a shot or like videoing a bee coming out of her cell or, trying to capture the dance on video or that kind of thing. As soon as I pull out my camera, she always stops dancing. That's that's the thing about the dances. But yeah, I've got some good stuff. My favorite thing that I recently was able to capture was the queen battle. I actually captured two queens fighting each other, which is like rarely seen. So that was pretty fun.
That's a good segue into my next topic. The drama queens, right?
The drama queens.
In the hive.
Yeah.
Why?
Why did they fight each other? Because so it is really dramatic, but basically there's a few different reasons why the colony would make new queens. And typically when they make a new queen, it's because they've lost their previous queen. Either she died suddenly or she left with a swarm, which is when that's the colony's way of making a new colony. They kind of split off. The original queen leaves with a group of bees and goes to establish a new nesting site somewhere else. And so what's left behind is all of these worker bees, the comb, the babies, the food, and then queens that are being grown to replace the one that left. And so they always make more than one because you don't want to put all your eggs in one basket. So they'll make several queens. And then as those queens start to emerge, they fight each other. And the winning queen is the one that takes over the colony. So they actually physically like grapple and try to sting each other. And usually the one that they only have to sting the other one once and then she's done for, but what's wild is that these queens, they have venom, but they use it only during these queen battles. They don't ever use it to sting like a human walking by or to defend the nest from a bear. That's not their job. So actually after this stage in their life, which is when they're very young, when they first come out, their venom is at its peak right then. And then after that, it kind of dries up and it's not even really usable anymore. So their bodies, the way that the bees' bodies like physiologically change in reaction to the needs of the colony as they age is also really interesting to think about.
Crazy. And that it goes back to the impression I get as I read and as you hear more about it from you, and what you're describing is that they are so perfectly formed almost in time, right? Like they're and you describe their body in a couple of the chapters too, right? The eyes and their the abdomen and the legs and all the little details about the legs and how they carry, like they seem to be so perfectly formed for what they need to do.
Yeah, like nothing is wasted. Like everything has a purpose. Like every little notch and hair on their bodies is for a reason. Yeah. It's very mind-blowing.
Right. And I wonder though, like, is it just evolution has come to a point where it's perfectly set up, or are there just if like an alien species were looking at us, would they think the same thing? Like these humans are so perfect, they have these fingers for catching things and opposable thumbs and legs.
Yeah,
no, that's not quite right. And maybe there are for the bees too. I don't know if you thought about
I'm glad your brain is going there, because that's what I wanted people to take away. Is I wanted people to be curious of like, well, what about this animal? Are they also perfect? You know, like if we just like looked at them and appreciated like for what they are, like with a different frame of mind, you know?
Yeah. Think about. So, so we've talked a lot about the honeybees, and obviously the book is about honeybees, but you said there's 20,000 other species. So how do honeybees sort of relate to other bees? And in particular, like here, there's a big thing about native bees and supporting native bees. And so how do they compete? Do they cooperate? How does that, have you looked into that?
Yeah, so you know, here in the United States, we have like 4,000 species of native bees, and honeybees are not native to here. They were brought in, you know, when white people came, you know, so it like from the Spaniards brought bees. And so they aren't native, but they've been here a long time and they're kind of naturalized. Now there's this kind of movement happening right now in the bee world, in the nature world, where people are concerned that honeybees are having a negative impact on the native species. There are some studies that have come out about it. And what they found is that sometimes, not always, but depending on the year, the environment, what the type of bees involved, honeybees are out competing these native species when there is a lack of forage. So when there's not enough food around, honeybees start going to things that these native bees need, and then there's not enough for everyone. And because the honeybees are so successful and they live in this super organism and there's so many of them and they can organize really well around what they need, they can really dominate the ecosystem and take the majority of the resources, leaving very little for the native bees. And so obviously that's concerning, and people are starting to kind of demonize honeybees for it. But I really think that makes no sense, because this is a new problem. And if it was really the honeybees' fault, then why would all of a sudden this be a problem now, but not before? Like, what has actually changed is that now we have climate change having a big impact on the flowering plants, whether or not they bloom, when they bloom. It doesn't sync up with the native bees' emergent times. We also have lack of habitat, lack of food, more pesticides being used. And those are all human things. That's so, to me, it's like, this is our fault. And I don't think we should be pointing the finger at this bee or that bee and trying to make one a scapegoat, when all of the solutions for helping all of them are the same. So like, if you want to help honeybees and you want to help native bees, the solutions are the same, which is create more habitat, plant more flowers, don't use pesticides, start doing something about climate change. And so I just think it's not helpful to think of the problem in that way. But unfortunately, there's this kind of divide happening right now, where people are really coming down on honeybees and saying that we shouldn't keep them, and we shouldn't support them, or we shouldn't like them.
No, I think that makes a lot of sense, because in the wild, right, like you said something, you know, this is not, we right now, you know, humans introduce this problem sort of, right? But in the past, honeybees and native bees must have lived together. And in a way, I mean, the honeybees are so adaptable, and you said they are in every continent in the world.
Except for Antarctica.
Antarctica. So their ability is what's allowed to survive everywhere. And I think if we let them alone, they'd probably be, you know, work it themselves out, native bees and honeybees. And like you said, need more habitat for all of them.
Exactly. And so I think, you know, the real problem is lack of forage, and then these other stressors that are affecting all of them.
Right. Dying here.
But I also love native bees, and so that's why it's really heartbreaking to like have people kind of come at me aggressively sometimes and, you know, get in my face about native bees, because I really love native bees too. And like, I plant for them and I photograph them and I try to educate people about them. the book you held up, The Little Book of Bees, is mostly about,
It's about all,
different kinds of bees. Yeah, it's not just about honeybees, about all different
right.
kinds of bees, and it's written kind of from like a world perspective, and not like specifically North America.
Well, and the other thing then, right, is, and I think you mentioned that at the end too, that just learning about and observing these bees, whether they're native or honeybees, it it increases your appreciation for all living creatures.
Yeah, and I think that when you form a connection and an interest with one species, it makes you start to look at all the adjacent species and start to rethink your opinions of them. So like for
Right.
me, like becoming a beekeeper, before I was a beekeeper, I didn't know anything about honeybees. I didn't know anything about native bees. I knew very little about insects in general, and now I'm like obsessed with it. Like I'm like, what is this spider? And that's I credit that to like loving honeybees. It's just kind of opened up my perspective. I think you're a little frozen. I don't know. Oh, there, you're still here, but you're just
Are we frozen?
okay. You're back. Yeah.
Okay.
No.
Oh, no, we just can't see anybody. Oh, there we go. Yay. We're
Yeah, I
back.
can see you again.
Yes. Sorry about that. Yeah, and then the other thing I wanted to ask is about the pictures in there. You mentioned you didn't take them. There's somebody else, right? Eric Tunet. But
Yeah.
they're gorgeous. Like some of these pictures, if you look at it, this is just incredible detail.
Yeah, he's like a very famous among beekeepers, like award-winning photographer.
So how did you connect up with him, or was that something your publisher
That was
handled?
my publisher's idea. And it just pairs really well with the text because the text is all about trying to make you see this intimate view of the bees, and that's exactly what those photos are. I mean, there's things in there that I've never seen captured on film, like the mating. He has the bees mating with each other, and that happens like 200 feet in the air. So I have no idea how he got that shot, but it's fantastic for the book.
That's, they're gorgeous. So what else do you have going on? So you're expanding your business.
I'm kind of just sitting pretty right now because I have a baby due in December. So try not to go too wild. I do have another book in the works that will mostly be for beekeepers. And then I have, I always like to make things so you never know what I'm going to end up doing. Like I have this mentorship program that I do online for beekeepers. I do classes and things with the local people. I do like honey tastings and tours and stuff. But I really like to make things, and kind of in theme with the messaging of this book is I made this card game that's supposed to teach you how to identify pollinators. And so I spent like a year working on this, and it's this very nerdy card game for like this very niche group of people. And so sometimes I'll just end up doing, yeah, sometimes I'll just end up doing something like that. So you never know. I just get these ideas and then I try to do them.
Of course, yeah. Well, that sounds very cool. Does anybody else have any questions? Did you want to? I don't. I had a few. We can open it up to questions. Anybody on the call have questions? You can put it in the chat or just speak up.
I have a question. The two questions. So I'll read out both, and then and you'll see why. So the first question is, what is the funniest or strangest question you've ever been asked about bees? But I'll ask my second question and see if maybe that's the most funniest. If bees could speak to humans, what do you think would be their first message?
I want to say stay away from my honey. I think that would be the message. Stop stealing my honey, maybe. Um, I can't think of like a funny question, but I do get a lot of funny calls from people. Um, One of the ones that was really funny was somebody called because their car was full of bees and they didn't know why, and they were panicking. And it turned out that they had sprayed lemongrass oil in their car. And this is actually something beekeepers use lemongrass oil to attract bees. And it attracts swarms of bees that are looking for a place to live, but it will just attract bees that are roving around because it's actually very close to a pheromone that they use that is like this come hither pheromone that says, hey, come this way. They use it at the entrance of their hives. They put it on flowers sometimes, and they put it in places where they want the swarm to land. So this poor woman was just trying to make her car smell nice, and she slathered it in lemongrass, and then she couldn't get rid of all these bees that kept coming to her car, and she didn't know what to do. And I just couldn't stop laughing, like, while she was telling me, because it's such a random thing that but it when you know about bees, it's like something you would never do. But you can't really blame her for not knowing that, you know.
That's
Yeah.
right.
So now you mentioned something about now we're stealing their bee and the honey. How do they adapt? Like, so are you able to, when beekeepers take out, because the honey they make is for themselves, make more money.
Yeah, so the trick is that when you're a beekeeper, you're actually putting them in a hive, in a cavity that you increase in size as they grow, and their instinct is just to fill their cavity with as much honey as they possibly can. So what happens is that they make way more honey than they actually need, and as a beekeeper, then you're able to take some and leave some. And actually, if you didn't take it, what would happen is it would just fuel them to send out all these swarms. So in some way, you know, when I'm talking to my beekeeping students, sometimes I'll refer to the honey as like money. It's like the bee money. It's like their energy that they're saving up. They can spend it on swarming, and they can spend it on building comb. And so when you leave them with too much, they start swarming all the time. And it's not necessarily good for the health of that individual colony, because it kind of wipes them out at a certain point if you let them do it too much. And then plus, your neighbors are not happy that these swarms are going into their yards. So it's kind of this situation where we kind of, I don't know if trick is the right word, but we kind of trick them into making more than they need. But I like to, you know, you can frame it in this kind of dubious way. But what I always think about is the bees are not imprisoned in the hive. And there's nothing keeping them there. Like, they don't have to stay. And at any point, they could pick up all their honey and they could leave, and they could go move into a wild tree. But not only do they not do that, they sometimes actively move into my boxes. Like, if I left an empty box out, almost every year, they move into my empty equipment on their own. And so they've chosen us, I feel like. There's such an interesting relationship between humans and bees, where you could frame it as this kind of, you know, the vegans don't like it and they say that we're imprisoning the bees and stealing their honey, and you could use these kind of negative connotations. But I think the bees chose us, and they choose to stay with us. And so we are helping them survive. We're giving them a place to live. And it's this kind of exchange, the symbiotic exchange, you know, we take some honey and we give them a place to live. But I don't even really like harvesting honey. I mean, it's honestly my least favorite thing of what beekeeping. Like, I enjoy eating it, but I don't like the process of taking it. It's a lot of work. And I hate, you know, like, I don't keep bees for the honey. I keep the bees for the bees. Like, I just love the bees. So for me, I'm just really fascinated by them, and it's not really about the honey at all. But I do enjoy having honey.
And do you find the honey, like the taste varies based on
Oh yeah.
where they go or what flowers they get it from?
Yeah, the flavors are extremely variable. So like, you could have two hives next to each other, and they might make different different colored honeys, different flavored honeys, because it depends on what flowers they're going to. And each colony is maybe going to different things. So like time of year, location, and then the bee's own preferences all dictates what the honey's going to be like. And so I always tell people, like, when you're traveling, you know, forget buying the magnets, get a jar of honey, because it's so fun to taste the honeys from different places. And it's kind of like you're tasting that city's like flower palette, you know?
Oh, that's pretty cool.
And you have so much. I'm looking at your website because you have so much information. You're so knowledgeable. And I just love, I mean, you have your shop. There's all sorts of things in your shop just for everybody else. I'm like, okay, I'm gonna and I don't know, I'm just so impressed about all your stuff and how you've built your business. I really like how, you know, you share so much about you and your knowledge and how you got there. So thank you.
Thanks. Yeah. It's, you know what? It's really fun for me because I feel like I have a lot of interests and a lot of like different things that I'm kind of good at, but I didn't really know what to do with them all. And when I found bees, it was like this way to kind of channel all of that energy into just, it's this, but it's about bees. And so it's like, I'm going to make a book. I'm, you know, because I always liked creative writing, but I didn't really know, like, what am I going to write about? Like, I wasn't super motivated until bees. And then I was like, I'm going to write a book, and then I'm going to make a game, and I'm going to do teaching, and like, I'm going to do public speaking. And like, I get to do all these kind of, I do like my own graphic design and stuff. And it's just like, I get to take pictures, you know, and make videos. And so it's kind of fun because I get to be very scatterbrained in terms of my interests, but it's like all centered on bees. So it helps me get things done.
Would you talk more about women and bees, being beekeepers? I've had a friend that got some women in Africa involved as a women beekeepers, as a way for the women to make their own money for independence in a way. So what drew your interest and what do you do with, you know, what does that mean, women at those beehives to you? What is that?
Well, I think that number one, beekeeping is usually a very traditional male role in most cultures, including in the US. And so I think there's this growing movement, at least in the US, of more women becoming interested in beekeeping. And when you look at the demographic, we see a lot more women hobbyist beekeepers, but the larger scale, like the more established beekeepers, the ones who get recognition, are all male. And so there's a few like women scientists who are kind of leaders of the research, but they're not necessarily given the same weight, the same speaking opportunities as the men. And there's this kind of general feeling that happens in the community of beekeepers. And so I think that there's that. But in terms of with the actual bees, I feel that, you know, in my experience working with women and men as a beekeeping mentor, I often see the women do a lot better as beekeepers. And I think it's because there is this desire to understand and be a caretaker that exists naturally within a lot of women that just connects really well with bees, this kind of level of observation and care. It's funny because a lot of women are, in my opinion, they're too cautious. They take too long to get started beekeeping. They just want to read books and they're too scared to like jump in and do it. So I'm always pushing them like, just do it, just get your bees and we'll just figure it out. And a lot of women are like almost too cautious with their bees. And on the other hand, the men that I work with are just too gung-ho with their bees. And they're jumping in and they're doing things without talking to me. And I'm like, you screwed that up. Why didn't you call me? Like, what were you thinking? And they're like, oh, I just thought I could do it myself. And so it's very funny because they both have their strengths, you know? So on the one hand, it's good that the men just want to jump in and do things. But on the other hand, they're more likely to mess up and kill their bees or hurt their bees. Whereas the women are much more cautious and careful with their hives. And so it's really interesting to watch that as like a teacher and work with people in that way. And there's always exceptions, you know, there's not totally gender, whatever. But yeah, it's funny to see that. And I think, you know, I think women also connect with honeybees because they have this kind of all female society within the colony. Like all the worker bees are female, then there's the queen, and then the males are kind of just extras, and they're only there for mating, and they don't do any work, they don't do any housework, and they're really, if they do succeed in mating, they die. And if they don't succeed in mating, they get kicked out of the hive because they're just a drag on resources. So I think a lot of women get a kick out of that. It's like living in an, you know, it's almost like that Barbie movie, like you get to go live in the alternate universe where the women are in power. And so I think there's that element of it too, which is fun.
Thank you.
Anyone else? I think we are coming up the end of the session. So thank you very much, Hilary, for doing this. This was very informative. It was very fun for me. And yeah, we're seeing claps from others. So that's pretty cool. It looks like we all enjoyed it. I try to do these 3 quick questions. So that the places before you leave. So are you game for that? Just whatever comes to mind. First one is, what do you wish you really understood? It could be about anything.
I guess I really wish I understood why people are so combative with each other, especially online. But like it happens in the beekeeping community, and it happens to me a lot as a woman, and I always wish that I could reach out to that person and get through to them. I can't, and every time I try, it's just a lesson in frustration. But I wish I understood like how to do that, disarm them and make them understand. You know.
Yeah. Next question: how do you tell someone they have their facts wrong?
I think I just tell them. They often don't believe me anyway, but I'll say, listen, I know what I'm talking about, and here are the facts, and like, here's the source or whatever.
And finally, what book changed your life? And you mentioned one already. So
yeah, well, I think I have to go with that book. I can't think of another book that's changed my life more than Kim Flodham's Backyard Beekeeping, because it sparked this whole journey for me. And I don't know if I would have be here today if it weren't for picking up that book. So it's pretty incredible.
well, thank you. This was very incredible for us, and we all learned a lot. So thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for writing this book, and I understand that you're gonna send me some book plates with your signature.
Yeah, they should be on the way. I sent them earlier this week. I don't know how long they'll take to get to you.
Yeah, no worries. So pass it along to customers who want it, and that'll be exciting.
Cool.
Anyway, thank you so much.
Thanks so much. Thanks for your interesting questions.
More books coming out from you. And if you're ever in Minnesota, you have to tell me. And
yes, I'll have to come by.
Now that I
haven't been yet.
You might be coming. Yeah, and we'll look forward to the game as well. Krista mentioned that the game, if you're ever
Oh yeah, great. Okay, bye.
Thanks. Have a great evening. Bye, everyone.